Their target seemed carefully chosen. A blind black man standing alone on his porch, a symbol of vulnerability in their eyes. They saw weakness where none existed. To them, he was an easy target, someone they could intimidate and silence. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have guessed, was that this man had spent his life in the shadows of war, honing skills and instincts that had saved countless lives. As the gang's intentions turned from words to violence, their actions would spark a confrontation that would ripple far beyond that night. What began as a cowardly show of dominance would ignite a battle for the soul of the neighborhood. And by the time the dust settled, the very power structures they had relied on to protect them would crumble, revealing just how dangerous it is to underestimate someone with nothing to lose and everything to protect. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. The streetlights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement as Elijah Eli Walker made his way home. The neighborhood was alive with muted sounds, the distant murmur of a radio, a baby crying, and the occasional bark of a restless dog. It was a place of resilience, where people greeted each other with nods and guarded smiles. But beneath the surface, a tension simmered. Eli tapped his cane lightly against the sidewalk, his movements deliberate. He didn't need the cane to find his way. Years of training had taught him to navigate with little more than echoes and instinct. But he carried it anyway, a concession to the image people expected of a blind man. He passed the Johnsons' house, where Mrs. Johnson sat on the porch, rocking gently in her chair. "Evening, Mr. Walker," she called, her voice tinged with warmth and weariness. "Evening, ma'am," Eli replied, tipping his head in her direction. As he neared his own house, he felt it before he heard it. A shift in the air. The kind of quiet that meant trouble. Voices drifted toward him from across the street, low and mocking. "Hey, look at this guy," one of them said, the words laced with venom. "What's he supposed to be? Some kind of ghost?" Laughter followed, harsh and cutting. Eli slowed his pace, his grip tightening on the cane. The group stepped out from the shadows, a pack of 5 men, all bald with tattooed arms that gleamed under the streetlights. They moved with the kind of confidence born from years of unchecked cruelty. Their leader, a stocky man with a snake tattoo coiling around his neck, spat on the ground and crossed the street toward Eli. "Hey, blind boy," he sneered. "You lost or something? Don't you know this ain't your neighborhood?" Eli stopped in front of his house, tilting his head slightly, as though listening to something they couldn't hear. "I know exactly where I am," he said quietly. The man's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "What? You think you're special or something? Walking around here like you own the place. Ain't nobody gonna save you, ghost eyes." Eli remained still, his voice calm and steady. "I'm not looking for trouble, but if you bring it to me, you won't like what you find." The leader let out a bark of laughter, motioning for the others to surround him. "Oh, we're gonna like it just fine." The tension in the air thickened as the men closed in, their shadows swallowing the faint light. From inside the house, the old clock chimed once, the sound sharp and clear. Eli exhaled slowly, his grip shifting slightly on the cane. Trouble had come, just as he'd known it would, and he was ready. The leader stepped closer, his smirk widening as he scanned Eli. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue, blind boy? Or are you too scared to say something?" Eli's cane tapped the ground lightly, a soft, deliberate motion. He tilted his head slightly, his white eyes catching the dim light. "I don't have anything to say to you. You're on my property. Leave." The gang chuckled, their laughter bouncing off the quiet street. The leader turned to his men, grinning. "Hear that? Blind boy thinks he can tell us what to do." "Yeah, like he owns the whole block or something," one of them chimed in, a wiry man with jagged tattoos creeping up his neck. "Walking around here like he's better than us." Eli's grip tightened slightly on his cane, but his face remained calm. "I didn't say that. I just said you need to leave." The leader stepped closer, invading Eli's space. "You don't tell us what to do. This ain't your block anymore. It's Axel's." Eli's brow furrowed, Axel! Who's Axel? The leader scoffed, shaking his head. You don't know? Figures. Axel's the one who runs things around here now, and he don't like people like you hanging around where you don't belong. Eli tilted his head, his voice calm but firm. I've lived here for years. This is my home. The wiry man laughed harshly, spitting on the ground near Eli's feet. Not anymore. Axel's taken over, and he don't want no blind hero or his kind messin' things up. Eli's jaw tightened. My kind? The leader grinned, leaning in close. Yeah, your kind. Always thinking you're better than the rest of us. But guess what? You're not. You're just another nobody who's gonna learn his place. Eli's stance shifted slightly, but his voice remained steady. I don't know Axel, and I don't care what he thinks he owns. This is my home, and I'm not going anywhere. The leader's face darkened, the grin replaced by a sneer. You don't care? You think Axel's the kind of man you just ignore? He's the reason we're here, blind boy. Sent us to make sure you got the message loud and clear. Eli's tone dropped, firm and resolute. You're done. Leave now, or you'll regret it. The gang exchanged glances, momentarily thrown by the unwavering confidence in his voice. But the leader quickly recovered, puffing out his chest. Regret it? What are you going to do? You can't even see us coming. One of the younger gang members hesitated, his eyes darting to the houses around them, where curtains twitched as neighbors peeked out. Boss, maybe we should... Shut it, the leader snapped, glaring at him. Ain't nobody coming out here to save him. They're all scared, just like he's about to be. Eli tilted his head again, his expression unreadable. They're not scared of me, and neither am I. The leader's lip curled in frustration. Big words from a man who can't see what's about to happen. You think you're tough? You ain't met Axel yet. He'll make sure you never walk these streets again. Eli's grip on his cane shifted slightly, his stance steady. If Axel wants to talk, he can come himself. You, though, you're done here. The leader let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You really think you're in charge, don't you? Boys, I think this blind fool needs a lesson. The gang closed in, their voices still mocking, but tinged with an edge of uncertainty. The tension was thick, the night air heavy with what was about to unfold. You hear him? Thinks he can talk down to us, one of the men sneered, his tattooed arms flexing as he cracked his knuckles. Like we're just gonna let some blind, black nobody tell us what to do. The wiry man grinned viciously, stepping closer. Yeah, you don't belong here, Ghost Eyes. Axel told us it's time to clean house. And guess who's first on the list? You. Blind. Black. And in the way. Eli remained still, his face unreadable, though his grip on the cane shifted ever so slightly. This is my home, he said, his voice low but steady. The leader sneered, leaning in closer. Your home? You're out of your mind. This block? This whole street? It's Axel's now. You're just squatters, taking up space where you don't belong. And we're here to make sure you get the message. Eli's head tilted slightly, his unseeing eyes fixed forward. A man who's afraid to face me himself doesn't own anything. That struck a nerve. The leader's sneer twisted into an angry snarl. You think Axel's afraid of you? Nah, he's just got better things to do than waste his time on some broken-down blind man who doesn't know when to shut up. Better things to do, the wiry man echoed mockingly. Yeah, like making sure this place is clean. And you're a stain that needs to be wiped out. Another member chimed in, his voice colder. You think you're tough, walking around like you're some kind of hero, but you're nothing. Just another leftover Axel's gonna sweep away. The leader jabbed a finger at Eli's chest. And we're here to do the sweeping. The gang circled tighter, their taunts growing louder, harsher. The leader's voice rose above the rest. You're not just blind. You're blind to reality. Nobody here's gonna save you. And you're sure as hell not saving yourself. Eli's stance shifted subtly, his head tilting slightly as though listening to something beyond the jeers. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried a weight that silenced their laughter. You've said enough. I warned you. Now, You'll learn the hard way. The leader barked another laugh, though it was tinged with irritation. Big words, blind boy. Let's see you back them up. One of the men lunged first, a fist swinging toward Eli. With a sudden, fluid motion, Eli sidestepped, his cane snapping up to deflect the blow. The sharp crack echoed in the night, and the man stumbled back, clutching his arm. The others hesitated for a fraction of a second, surprised by the speed of Eli's reaction. The leader snarled. "What the hell are you waiting for? Take him down!" The fight had begun, and the tension exploded into chaos. The air snapped with tension as the first man lunged toward Eli, a clumsy fist swinging toward his face. Eli moved fluidly, instinct taking over. He pivoted on his heel, the punch slicing through empty air. Before the man could recover, Eli's cane struck his wrist with a sharp crack. The attacker yelped, stumbling back as pain shot up his arm. Eli didn't waste a moment. A second figure was already closing in from his left, and though his sight was faint, his other senses guided him. He caught the movement in his peripheral vision and stepped aside, his cane sweeping low and hooking behind the man's ankle. A swift tug sent the attacker sprawling to the ground, his head hitting the pavement with a dull thud. "Get him!" the wiry man barked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Eli's breathing was steady, his mind laser-focused. Years of Navy SEAL training had honed him into a weapon, a man who could fight even in the dark. His blindness wasn't a weakness. It was a challenge he had learned to master. The gang hesitated for only a moment before rushing as a group, their jeers turning into frustrated growls. Eli didn't falter. His world narrowed to sound and motion. The scrape of boots on gravel, the rush of air as fists swung toward him, the vibrations of the pavement under his feet. Two attackers came at him from opposite sides, trying to overwhelm him. Eli ducked low, letting their momentum carry them past him. His cane snapped upward into one man's stomach, the impact doubling him over with a gasp. Without pausing, Eli turned and drove an elbow into the second man's jaw, sending him staggering back. The leader snarled from behind the group. "Stop messing around! Put him down already!" Another man lunged, his arm outstretched to grab Eli, but Eli turned into the hold, twisting the attacker's wrist and using his momentum to flip him over. The man hit the ground with a groan, clutching his arm. Eli's ribs ached as a glancing kick connected, forcing him to stagger. The gang was adjusting, learning his movements. But Eli's training kept him ahead. He stepped back, steadying his breath. Pain was nothing new to him. On the battlefield, he'd faced worse. The wiry man circled warily, his confidence starting to waver. "Boss, he's not fighting like a regular guy. This guy's trained." The leader shoved him forward, his voice hard and furious. "Then stop fighting like regular guys and take him out." Eli heard the leader's heavy steps, moving closer with purpose. He adjusted his grip on the cane, shifting his stance slightly. "You're too loud," Eli said calmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. The leader lunged, but Eli's cane snapped upward, connecting with the side of his head. The leader stumbled back, clutching his temple. But the momentary success came with a cost. Another gang member slipped past Eli's defenses, landing a punch to his jaw. The impact was jarring, sending him staggering back a step. His world tilted briefly, but Eli steadied himself, tightening his grip on the cane. "You've already lost," Eli said, his tone even but resolute. The leader recovered, rubbing his head as he glared at Eli. "Not yet," he growled, motioning for the others. "Hit him from all sides. Don't let up." The gang roared in frustration, rushing in again. The night erupted into chaos, the fight far from over. The gang rushed Eli again, their shouts echoing through the still night. Eli steadied his breathing, his mind narrowing in on the sounds and vibrations around him. Years of Navy SEAL training came flooding back. Control, precision, efficiency. He wasn't just fighting. He was surviving. The first attacker came from his left, swinging a broken bottle in a wide arc. Eli caught the sound of glass cutting the air and stepped inside the swing, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting sharply. The bottle clattered to the ground as the man cried out, clutching his arm in pain. Eli followed with a swift strike to the side of his head, sending him to the pavement. Another rushed in from behind, but Eli felt the shift in the air and ducked just in time. A steel pipe whistled over his head, narrowly missing. Using the momentum of his duck, Eli spun low, his cane sweeping out to hook the attacker's legs. The man crashed to the ground, the pipe bouncing from his grip. The wiry man with the skull tattoo hesitated, his bravado starting to crack. "You can't keep this up, old man," he shouted, his voice trembling slightly. Eli turned his head toward him, his unseeing eyes calm and steady. "Try me." The wiry man hesitated for just a second too long. Eli closed the gap, his cane striking like a viper. A blow to the wrist sent the man's arm flailing, and a follow-up strike to the knee dropped him to the ground with a cry of pain. "Get him!" the leader bellowed, his voice tinged with frustration. "What's wrong with you? He's just one guy!" Two of the remaining men charged together, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Eli shifted, letting their wild swings miss as he countered with calculated precision. His elbow connected with one man's nose, a sickening crack accompanying his fall. The other caught a sharp jab to the ribs, doubling over just as Eli swept his cane across his back, dropping him beside his friend. The fight was chaos, but Eli's movements were deliberate, each strike calculated to disable and disarm. The leader cursed loudly, backing away as Eli turned toward him. "Twayor, you think you've won?" he shouted, his voice faltering. "Axel's not gonna let this slide. You'll see." The wiry man scrambled to his feet, clutching his bruised knee. "I'm not sticking around for this," he yelled, limping away into the shadows. Another man followed, dragging his injured friend, their retreat marked by muttered curses and pained groans. Eli stood still for a moment, listening to the sounds of their retreat. The leader, now alone with two others lying groaning on the ground, glared at Eli with fury and frustration. "You've made a big mistake, old man," he growled, backing away slowly. "Axel's gonna hear about this, and when he does, you're done." Eli didn't move, his stance steady, his grip firm on the cane. His voice was calm, unshaken. "I'll be waiting." The leader spat on the ground, then turned and disappeared into the night, leaving his injured men behind. Eli took a deep breath, his senses still sharp, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the faint rustle of curtains as neighbors peeked out, the quiet tension hanging heavy in the air. The fight was over. For now. The quiet after the fight was sharp, the faint sound of retreating footsteps fading into the distance. Eli stood still for a moment, his breathing steady as he assessed his surroundings. His senses, honed by years of training, picked up every detail. The groans of pain from the men on the ground, the rustle of curtains as neighbors watched from the safety of their homes, the metallic tang of blood in the air. He turned toward the two injured men lying on the pavement, their bodies twisted in pain. Slowly, deliberately, he walked over to the first, his cane tapping softly against the ground with each step. The man tried to scramble backward, but his injured leg refused to cooperate. "Stay back!" he croaked, his voice trembling. Eli stopped, tilting his head slightly. His white, glassy eyes seemed to look straight through the man. "Who is Axel?" he asked, his tone low and commanding. The man clutched his knee, his face pale. I don't know much, man. He's just the boss. He tells us what to do." Eli crouched down slowly, bringing himself to the man's level. His voice dropped further, ice lacing his words. "That's not good enough. What does he want with this neighborhood? Why did he send you here?" The man swallowed hard, his eyes darting around as though searching for an escape. "He wants control. He wants to own the whole block. Businesses, houses, everything. He said people like you're in the way." Eli's jaw tightened, and he leaned in closer. "People like me, blind and black. Is that it?" The man flinched, his lips trembling. I didn't mean. Eli cut him off sharply. You came to my home. You brought this fight. You don't get to hide behind excuses now. Tell me where to find Axel. The second man groaned from a few feet away, trying to push himself up on one arm. Eli turned his attention toward him, standing and walking over with measured steps. You, Eli said, his voice sharp. Where does Axel operate? Speak, the second man coughed, spitting blood onto the pavement. Warehouse. Near the docks. He runs things from there. But you're crazy if you think you can take him on. He'll kill you. Eli crouched again, his expression unreadable. He sent you here thinking I was weak. I think he's the one who underestimated me. The first man whimpered, his fear palpable. Look, man, just let us go. We're done, okay? We won't come back. Eli's voice hardened. You'll go when I decide you're done. He stood and turned toward his house. Stay here. Don't try anything. The men exchanged panicked glances but were too injured to move. Eli disappeared inside his home for a moment, emerging with a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. The first man's eyes widened in terror. What are you going to do with that? Eli didn't respond immediately, his steps measured as he approached. You came here to send a message. Now, you're going to help me send one back. The men squirmed, their protests weak and uncoordinated, as Eli knelt to tie their hands behind their backs. His movements were calm, deliberate, every knot secure. The quiet neighborhood seemed to hold its breath as Eli worked, the groans of the injured men the only sounds breaking the silence. Once they were restrained, Eli stood over them, his figure silhouetted by the faint streetlights. Now, he said, his voice low and unyielding, you're going to tell me everything I need to know about Axel. Eli tightened the last knot on the ropes binding the two men before grabbing the loose ends and pulling them to their feet. They stumbled, groaning from their injuries, as he guided them toward his house. Wait! What are you doing? The wiry man asked, his voice shaking. You can't just take us inside. Eli didn't answer, his steps firm and unyielding. His focus was absolute. Once inside, the room was dimly lit, its sparse furniture casting long shadows against the walls. Eli maneuvered the men to a wooden chair and forced them to sit down, tying them securely to it. The silence of the house was oppressive, broken only by their labored breathing. Look, the first man said, struggling against the ropes. Just call the cops, man. We'll tell them everything, okay? Just let them handle it. Eli paused, standing over them, his white eyes unreadable. Call the cops? He repeated, his tone almost mocking. That's convenient. Coming from you. Yeah, man, the wiry one blurted out, his voice cracking. They'll handle this. You don't gotta do anything else. We'll tell them about Axel. Just let us go, all right? Eli tilted his head slightly, his expression calm but cold. If you're scared of the police, you shouldn't have come here in the first place. But something tells me you're not scared of the cops. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping. You're scared of me. The first man swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. We'll talk, okay? Just don't hurt us. Eli's voice remained steady, unshaken. You'll talk, but not to the police. Not yet. First, you're going to tell me everything I need to know about Axel. His operations, his plans, everything. The wiry man squirmed, his eyes darting around the room. What do you even want with Axel? You don't know who you're messing with, man. He runs everything. The warehouses, the streets. He's got guys everywhere. Eli crossed his arms, standing tall over them. Good. Then start with the warehouses. How many? Where are they? And what's inside them? The first man's resolve broke, his voice spilling out in a rush. There's a main one by the docks. That's where Axel stays most of the time. It's got everything. Money, drugs, weapons. He uses it to control the whole block. If you're in his way, he sends guys like us to deal with you. Eli nodded slowly, his expression giving nothing away. And who else works for him? How many men does he have? The wiry man shook his head frantically. A lot. Too many for you to handle alone. If you go after him, you're a dead man. You don't know what he'll do to you? Eli leaned in closer, his face inches from the man's. That's not your concern. What else? The first man hesitated, his lips trembling. Look, man, we don't know everything, okay? We're just small time. Axel tells us what to do, and we do it. That's it. We don't get involved in the bigger stuff. Eli studied them for a long moment, his silence heavy. Then he straightened, his voice firm. You've given me enough for now, but don't think you're off the hook. What are you gonna do with us? The wiry man asked, his voice cracking with fear. Eli's face was unreadable as he turned away, heading toward a nearby table. That depends. If I think you're lying, you'll wish the police were your problem. The two men exchanged panicked glances, their breathing ragged. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating, the weight of Eli's presence pressing down on them. You're insane, the first man whispered, his voice barely audible. Eli turned back to face them, his stance calm, his voice resolute. No, I'm a man protecting his home. Axel made a mistake coming after me. And so did you. Eli stood silently for a moment, the room heavy with the sound of the two men's labored breathing. Their eyes darted nervously, tracking his every movement as he pulled open a nearby drawer. What? What are you doing now? The wiry man stammered, straining against his bonds. Eli didn't answer immediately. From the drawer, he retrieved two large plain canvas bags. He held one up briefly before speaking, his voice calm and deliberate. You wanted to send a message. Now, you're going to help me send one back. No, man, come on! The wiry man yelped, wriggling harder in his chair. You don't have to do this. We told you what you wanted. Eli's expression was unreadable as he approached. And now, I'm making sure Axel knows the consequences of coming after me. The other man froze, wide-eyed. Please, man, just call the cops. We'll talk to them. Eli cut him off, his tone sharp. The cops don't scare Axel, but this will. Without another word, he pulled the first bag over the wiry man's head. The man's muffled protests filled the room, frantic and desperate. Eli moved to the other man and did the same, ignoring their writhing. Once their heads were covered, Eli untied the ropes binding them to the chairs, keeping their hands securely tied behind their backs. He pulled them to their feet, his movements firm and controlled. Move! He ordered, his voice cold and commanding. The men stumbled, blind and disoriented, as Eli guided them toward the door. Outside, the air was cool, the quiet street illuminated by the pale glow of a flickering lamppost. Eli led them to the base of the lamppost and forced them to sit. He worked quickly, tying their ankles together and securing them tightly to the metal pole. Please! One of them whimpered from beneath the bag. We're done, okay? We won't come back. Eli stood over them, his voice steady and unyielding. Good, because if I see you on this street again, this will seem like mercy. The men fell silent, their breaths ragged and shallow. Eli turned, his steps measured, as he walked back toward his house. The neighborhood was still, though he could feel the eyes of neighbors watching from behind their curtains. He didn't need to see them to know they'd witnessed everything. Inside, Eli locked the door and paused, taking a deep breath. He leaned against the counter for a moment, his mind already working. The information he'd extracted replayed in his head. The warehouse by the docks, Axel's control over the area, the weapons and resources he had at his disposal. This wasn't just about him anymore. Axel's operations threatened the entire neighborhood, and Eli couldn't let that stand. He moved to the table and spread out a large sheet of paper, sketching a rough map of the docks from memory. Every movement was calculated, every line deliberate. Years of Navy SEAL training had taught him the value of preparation. If Axel was expecting fear, he would find the opposite. Eli's jaw tightened as he marked the location of the warehouse. Tonight had been a warning. The real fight was just beginning. Eli sat at his kitchen table, running his hands over the map he'd sketched. The faint shapes and lines his vision allowed were enough to recall the fight from earlier. Shadows of movement, bursts of sound, and the raw vibrations of bodies hitting the pavement. His thoughts lingered on the information the gang members had revealed. a warehouse at the docks. Axel's operation was far larger than he had imagined. This wasn't just about a group of thugs attacking his home. It was a calculated effort to control the entire neighborhood. Eli knew his skills could take him far, but the fight had also revealed his limits. His eyes were no longer his strongest tool, and for the first time since the attack, he admitted he couldn't do this alone. The next evening, Eli made his way to Maya's diner. The streets were quiet, the faint hum of distant cars the only sound. He relied on his cane to navigate the cracks and uneven pavement, but his ears, and what little he could see, a vague glow of street lights and shadowy outlines, kept him aware of his surroundings. The bell above the diner door jingled softly as he entered. The smell of coffee and frying bacon wafted through the air, comforting in its familiarity. Maya looked up from behind the counter, her brows furrowing in concern. "Eli?" she asked, walking over to meet him. "What are you doing out so late?" "I need your help," Eli said, his tone quiet but firm. Maya led him to a booth, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one was eavesdropping. Once seated, she leaned forward. "What's going on?" Eli rested his hands on the table. "There's a man named Axel trying to take over this neighborhood. He's running more than just a street gang. He's targeting homes, businesses, everything. And he's operating out of a warehouse by the docks." Maya blinked in surprise. "Axel? I've never heard that name before. How do you know all this?" Eli's face was calm, his voice steady. "The men who came after me told me. They were working for him." Maya's brow furrowed. "Came after you? What happened?" "They attacked me," Eli said simply. "They thought I'd be an easy target." "They were wrong." Maya's eyes widened. "Eli, you should have told someone. You can't handle this on your own." "I know," Eli interrupted. "That's why I'm here. I need help, Maya. This isn't just about me. If Axel isn't stopped, he'll take over everything we've worked to build here." Maya nodded slowly, though her worry didn't fade. "Okay, what do you need?" "People I can trust," Eli said. "People who care about this neighborhood as much as I do. They don't need to fight. They just need to help me gather information." Maya tapped her fingers against the table, thinking, "All right, I know some folks who might step up. Jenkins from the hardware store. He's always hated the gang harassing his customers. Angie at the laundromat, too. She keeps her ear to the ground, hears everything that happens around here." "That's a good start," Eli said. "We need to find out everything we can about Axel. How many men he has, what they're guarding, their routines. The more we know, the better we can prepare." By the next evening, Eli's living room was filled with a small group of neighbors. Maya had brought Jenkins, a wiry older man with a weathered face, and Angie, a sharp-eyed woman who exuded quiet confidence. "So what's this about, Eli?" Jenkins asked, leaning against the wall. "Maya said you've got a problem that needs fixing." Eli nodded. "There's a man named Axel. He's running an operation out of a warehouse by the docks. Drugs, weapons, money. He's trying to take over this neighborhood. And we're in his way." Angie crossed her arms. "Never heard of this Axel before." "You sure about this?" "I'm sure," Eli said firmly. "The men who attacked me work for him. They said Axel's trying to control everything. Our homes, our businesses, all of it. If we wait, he'll tighten his grip until it's too late to stop him." Jenkins frowned. "And what do you expect us to do?" "We're not fighters, Eli." "You don't have to fight," Eli replied. "But I need eyes and ears. We need to gather information. How many men Axel has, what their routines are, where the weak points in his operation might be." Maya nodded. "If we can figure that out, we can hit him where it hurts, without putting everyone at risk." Jenkins sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've got some old equipment I can rig up. Something to cause a ruckus if we need to distract them. And I can spread the word quietly," Angie added. "People talk when they think no one's listening." Eli leaned forward, his voice calm but resolute. "This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. Axel thinks he can take what he wants. We need to show him he's wrong." The group exchanged glances, the weight of the fight ahead settling over them. Slowly they nodded, their resolve building. Eli stood in his living room, the faint outlines of the gathered neighbors just visible in the dim light. The map of the docks lay on the coffee table, surrounded by scraps of paper and small tools Jenkins had brought from his hardware store. The air was thick with tension, but also a growing sense of purpose. "All right," Eli said, his tone calm but firm. "First step is gathering information. We need eyes on that warehouse. Shift changes, deliveries, any patterns we can exploit." Angie leaned over the map, squinting at the rough lines. "There's a back alley here," she said, pointing to a section near the warehouse. "I've seen some of their trucks going in and out. I can stake it out. See what I can learn." Jenkins nodded. "And I can rig some of these," he said, holding up a bundle of old car alarms. "Set 'em off when we need to pull their attention away." "That's good," Eli said, nodding. "We'll also need to make sure no one in the neighborhood tips them off. Axel's men don't trust easily, but someone desperate enough might sell us out." Maya crossed her arms. "I'll handle that. People talk to me at the diner. I can make sure the wrong ears don't hear anything." The room was quiet for a moment, the gravity of their mission sinking in. Then Angie broke the silence. "Look, I get that we're doing this, but shouldn't we get the police involved? If Axel's running drugs and weapons, they're the ones who should be taking him down, not us." Eli turned his head slightly toward her, his white eyes catching the faint light. "The police?" His voice was calm, but the edge in his tone was unmistakable. "Yes," Angie pressed. "This is their job, isn't it? Why risk ourselves when we could just tip them off?" Eli exhaled slowly, his expression hardening. "You think they don't know?" Angie frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "They know," Eli said, his voice steady but firm. "They know exactly what's happening, but they won't do anything about it. Either they're on Axel's payroll, or they're too scared to get involved. Either way, the police are useless to us." Jenkins leaned back against the wall, nodding grimly. "He's not wrong. I've seen Axel's guys hanging around the precinct. They're bold because they know no one's coming for them." Angie hesitated, glancing at Maya. "So it's really just us?" "It's always been just us," Maya said quietly. "But that's why we're doing this. If we don't fight back, no one will." Eli leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone in this neighborhood who's too scared to stand up. If Axel wins, he won't stop until he's taken every